She looked directly into her 8-year-old son's eyes and said the words that would destroy his childhood forever. In front of 29 classmates, she called him a liar, a troublemaker, and an embarrassment to the family name. What those children didn't know was that this teacher wasn't just humiliating a student. She was systematically destroying her own child to hide a secret so explosive it would eventually bring down an entire school district and lead to federal legislation. This is the true story of how one moment of cruelty in a Pennsylvania classroom became a national scandal that changed everything we thought we knew about the people we trust with our children. Before we proceed deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Detective Morgan, and for the past 20 years I've investigated cases that most people would rather forget. Cases involving betrayal at the highest levels, corruption in places we consider sacred, and secrets that powerful people will kill to protect. But in all my years of investigation, nothing prepared me for what I discovered in the small town of Riverside, Pennsylvania. This case began with what appeared to be a simple incident of teacher misconduct. Another teacher has witnessed a humiliation of a student by his own mother. During a classroom exercise, the teacher would receive counseling, maybe a reprimand in her file. Case closed. Except it wasn't closed. Because what that mother captured on her phone when she secretly recorded a parent-teacher conference 3 weeks later would expose a criminal conspiracy involving stolen funds, forged documents, and a cover-up that reached the highest levels of the state education department. The teacher's name was Linda Richardson, 42 years old, 15 years of teaching experience, mother of 3 children including 8-year-old Timothy, who sat in her 3rd grade classroom every day. Timothy was a bright kid, maybe too bright for his own good. He noticed things that other children missed. He asked questions that made adults Riverside uncomfortable. And on October 15, 2021, he made an observation that would change his life forever. What Timothy witnessed at home should have been reported to authorities immediately. Instead, his mother chose to silence him in the most devastating way possible. She turned him into a public example of what happens when children tell inconvenient truths. Riverside Elementary School sits in the heart of Pennsylvania coal country, where families have lived for generations and everyone knows everyone else's business. The school serves 400 students from kindergarten through 5th grade, and Linda Richardson had been teaching there since 2006. She was respected by colleagues, trusted by parents, and beloved by students. Her own children attended the school, and neighbors often commented on what a wonderful mother she appeared to be. Timothy Richardson was different from his older siblings. While his brothers excelled at sports and social activities, Timothy preferred books and puzzles. He had an extraordinary memory for details and a habit of asking questions that made adults squirm. His teachers often described him as mature beyond his years, though they didn't always mean it as a compliment. The Richardson family lived in a modest 2-story house on Maple Street, just 6 blocks from the elementary school. Linda's husband, Robert, worked as a maintenance supervisor at a local manufacturing plant. Their combined income was comfortable but not extravagant. They drove used cars, shopped at discount stores, and took their vacations at nearby state parks. To their neighbors, they represented the American middle class at its most ordinary and respectable. But beneath this facade of normalcy, Linda Richardson was living a double life that was about to implode. The first signs of trouble had appeared 2 years earlier, in the fall of 2019. The school district had implemented a new computer system for tracking student expenses and fundraising activities. As the designated treasurer for her grade level, Linda was responsible for collecting money from various school programs, including book fairs, field trip fees, and the annual candy sale fundraiser. The new system was supposed to make financial tracking more transparent and efficient. Instead, it created opportunities for those who understood how to manipulate electronic records. Linda Richardson understood very well. Over the course of 18 months, she had systematically diverted funds from student activities into her personal accounts. The amounts were small initially, $50 here, $100 there. Money that would be difficult to trace and even harder to prove missing. She told herself it was temporary. that she would pay it back when Robert got his promised promotion. But Robert's promotion never came, and Linda's theft gradually escalated. By the summer of 2021, she had stolen nearly $37,000 from accounts designated for children's educational activities. Timothy began noticing changes in his mother's behavior during the summer before third grade. She spent hours at her computer late at night, typing rapidly and occasionally cursing under her breath. Phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. Envelopes hidden in kitchen drawers that contained more cash than their family normally kept around the house. Most disturbing of all, his mother had begun asking him detailed questions about conversations he had with other children at school. What did they talk about during lunch? Did anyone ask questions about his family? Had he mentioned anything about money or his parents' jobs? Timothy answered these questions honestly because he trusted his mother completely. He told her about playground conversations, about which children seemed curious about family finances, about teachers who asked students to bring in fundraising money. What he didn't understand was that his mother was using this information to stay one step ahead of any potential investigation. She knew which parents were asking questions, she knew which teachers were becoming suspicious about missing funds, and she knew that her son's innocent observations were helping her avoid detection. October 15th, 2021. Started as an ordinary Friday at Riverside Elementary. Third grade classes were participating in their monthly Community Helpers presentation, where students shared information about jobs their family members performed. Timothy Richardson had prepared a presentation about his father's work at the manufacturing plant. He had visited the facility during a recent Family Day event and was excited to share what he had learned about industrial machinery and safety procedures. But as the presentations began, Timothy noticed something that his mother hoped he would never see. Janet Morrison, whose daughter was in Timothy's class, had arrived early to watch the presentations. She was also the newly elected treasurer of the Parent-Teacher Association, a position that gave her access to financial records that Linda Richardson desperately wanted to keep private. As Janet entered the classroom, Timothy watched his mother's face transform from friendly teacher smile to barely controlled panic. Linda quickly excused herself from the classroom, claiming she needed to retrieve additional materials from her office. What she actually needed was time to compose herself and decide how to handle this unexpected threat. Timothy knew his mother well enough to recognize when she was upset, but he couldn't understand why the presence of another parent would cause such distress. When Linda returned to the classroom 10 minutes later, her demeanor had changed completely. She was curt with students, rushed through presentations, and seemed particularly impatient with Timothy's detailed description of manufacturing processes. Other students began to notice the tension, and the atmosphere in the classroom became increasingly uncomfortable. The crisis moment came when Timothy, eager to share everything he had learned during his factory visit, mentioned that his father sometimes brought home extra supplies from work. These were legitimate items that the company allowed employees to take, things like safety gloves, cleaning materials, and basic tools. But in Linda's mind, already consumed by guilt over her own theft, Timothy's innocent comment sounded like an admission of wrongdoing. Worse, he was saying it in front of Janet Morrison, who was taking notes for a PTA newsletter article about the presentations. Linda Richardson made a decision that would haunt her family for years to come. Instead of simply redirecting the conversation or asking Timothy to focus on other aspects of his father's job, she chose to publicly shame him into silence. Her voice cut through the classroom chatter with surgical precision. She told Timothy that his comments about bringing things home from work were inappropriate and suggested he was trying to make his family sound more important than they actually were. She reminded him that exaggerating and telling stories was not acceptable behavior, especially in front of guests. The effect on Timothy was immediate and devastating. His face flushed red, his hands began to shake, and tears formed in his eyes as he realized that his mother was criticizing him in front of his classmates and a parent he barely knew. The other children fell silent, unsure how to respond to such an unexpected display of maternal disapproval. Janet Morrison stopped taking notes and looked uncomfortable, sensing that she was witnessing something that went far beyond normal classroom discipline. But Linda wasn't finished. Perhaps sensing that her initial response had been too harsh, or maybe driven by the adrenaline of her panic, she continued her public criticism of Timothy. She suggested that he had a tendency to embellish stories to get attention, that he sometimes confused fantasy with reality, and that this was something the family was working to correct at home. Each word was carefully chosen to undermine Timothy's credibility, while maintaining the appearance of concerned parenting. By the time she finished speaking, Timothy was openly crying, and several other children were looking at him with expressions of confusion and pity. Janet Morrison left the classroom that afternoon deeply troubled by what she had witnessed. As a parent herself, she understood that children sometimes needed correction, but the public nature and intensity of Linda's response seemed completely disproportionate to Timothy's innocent comments about his father's job. More importantly, as the new PTA treasurer, she was beginning to notice irregularities in the financial records that Linda Richardson had maintained for the past 2 years. Small discrepancies that individually seemed insignificant, but collectively suggested a pattern of financial mismanagement. That evening, Janet called 2 other PTA board members to discuss her concerns. She didn't mention the classroom incident directly, but she did ask questions about Timothy Richardson's behavior and whether other parents had noticed any unusual family dynamics. What she learned was that Timothy had recently become more withdrawn at school, that he seemed anxious during parent volunteer activities, and that he had stopped participating in conversations about family activities and weekend plans. These behavioral changes, combined with the financial irregularities she was discovering, convinced Janet that something was seriously wrong. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Detective Martinez decided to interview Timothy Richardson's teachers and classmates. What she learned was that Timothy had been displaying signs of emotional distress for months, long before the classroom incident that had triggered Janet Morrison's suspicions. He had become increasingly anxious about family financial discussions, reluctant to participate in school fundraising activities, and withdrawn from social interactions with other children. Several teachers had noticed these changes, but had attributed them to normal developmental issues rather than family problems. More significantly, Detective Martinez discovered that Timothy had been asking teachers and school counselors questions that suggested he was aware of his mother's criminal activities. He had inquired about what happens when people take money that doesn't belong to them. He had asked whether children could get in trouble for things their parents did wrong. He had even directly asked his school counselor whether teachers ever stole money from schools. These questions, viewed in isolation, might have seemed like normal childhood curiosity. But in the context of the financial investigation, they suggested that Timothy knew exactly what his mother was doing and was struggling with the moral implications of that knowledge. Detective Martinez realized that Timothy Richardson wasn't just a victim of his mother's public humiliation. He was potentially the only witness who could provide direct evidence of Linda's criminal activities. But interviewing a child about his mother's crimes would require careful planning and the involvement of child protection services. The investigation was about to become much more complicated. The interview with Timothy Richardson took place on November 2nd, 2021, at the County Child Advocacy Center, a facility designed specifically for interviewing children in sensitive legal cases. Detective Martinez was accompanied by a trained child psychologist and a representative from the County Child Protection Agency. Timothy's father, Robert, was present, but remained in an observation room to avoid influencing his son's responses. Linda Richardson had been arrested 3 days earlier and was being held on bail, charged with theft, fraud, and child endangerment. Timothy's testimony was both heartbreaking and damning. Speaking in a quiet voice that barely rose above a whisper, he described months of watching his mother count large amounts of cash at the kitchen table every evening after school. He had seen her hide money in various locations throughout their house, including inside books, taped to the undersides of furniture, and sealed in plastic bags hidden in their basement. Most importantly, he had overheard phone conversations where his mother discussed moving money between accounts and expressed concern about being discovered by school auditors. But Timothy's most devastating revelation concerned the events leading up to the classroom incident that had started the investigation. He testified that his mother had specifically instructed him never to mention anything about money or financial matters when talking to other children or their parents. She had rehearsed with him what to say if anyone asked questions about his family's finances or his parents' jobs. She had even practiced scenarios where he might be tempted to share information that could get the family in trouble. According to Timothy's testimony, the classroom incident wasn't a spontaneous moment of discipline. It was a calculated decision by Linda Richardson to publicly destroy her son's credibility before he could inadvertently expose her crimes. She had recognized Janet Morrison as a potential threat and had chosen to sacrifice Timothy's emotional well-being rather than risk being discovered. The public humiliation was intended to ensure that anything Timothy might say about family finances would be dismissed as attention-seeking behavior or childhood fantasy. Timothy also revealed that the incident in the classroom wasn't the first time his mother had publicly undermined him to protect her secret. Over the previous 6 months, she had contradicted him in front of neighbors when he mentioned family purchases, corrected him harshly when he talked about money around relatives, and consistently portrayed him as a child who exaggerated stories to get attention. This pattern of behavior had been gradually destroying Timothy's self-confidence and his relationship with extended family members who began to view him as an unreliable narrator of family events. The psychological evaluation conducted during Timothy's interview revealed the full extent of the damage that Linda's actions had caused. Timothy exhibited symptoms of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress that were consistent with prolonged emotional abuse. He had internalized his mother's public criticisms to the point where he genuinely believed that he was a troublemaker who couldn't be trusted to tell the truth. He expressed guilt about the criminal investigation, convinced that he had somehow caused his mother's arrest by failing to keep her secrets adequately hidden. Detective Martinez realized that this case represented something far more complex than simple financial theft. Linda Richardson had committed a form of psychological child abuse that was particularly insidious, because it involved systematically undermining her son's sense of reality and self-worth. Timothy had been made complicit in his mother's crimes, and then punished for possessing knowledge that he was too young to understand or handle appropriately. The damage to his development and family relationships would likely require years of therapy to address. The investigation also revealed that Robert Richardson had been completely unaware of his wife's criminal activities. Financial records showed that Linda had maintained separate bank accounts and had been intercepting mail to hide evidence of her theft. Robert worked long hours and trusted his wife to handle family finances, a trust that Linda had systematically exploited to fund her criminal enterprise. The discovery of his wife's crimes and their impact on Timothy devastated Robert, who struggled with feelings of guilt about failing to protect his son from a threat he never knew existed. As the criminal case against Linda Richardson progressed through the court system, the full scope of her crimes became public knowledge. Local media coverage focused initially on the financial theft, but the story of Timothy's public humiliation generated national attention when child advocacy groups began discussing the case as an example of how criminal parents often victimize their own children to avoid detection. The classroom incident became a symbol of the lengths to which some people will go to protect themselves, even when it means destroying the people they claim to love most. Linda Richardson's trial began on March 7, 2022, nearly 5 months after her arrest. The prosecution's case was methodical and overwhelming, built on financial records that documented every theft, digital evidence that proved premeditation, and Timothy's testimony that revealed the psychological manipulation Linda had employed to avoid detection. The defense attempted to portray Linda as a desperate mother who had made poor decisions under financial stress, but the evidence of calculated criminal behavior made this argument difficult to sustain. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when the prosecution played a recording that investigators had discovered on Linda's computer. It was a voice memo she had created for herself, apparently as a way of rehearsing responses to potential questions about missing money. In the recording, Linda could be heard practicing explanations for financial discrepancies and discussing ways to shift blame to other volunteers or administrative errors. Most chilling was her discussion of Timothy's tendency to share family information and her plans to manage his storytelling to prevent complications. Timothy testified during the trial, describing his mother's financial activities and the systematic undermining of his credibility that had occurred over many months. His testimony was delivered in a flat, emotionless tone that child psychologists recognized as a symptom of trauma. He answered questions accurately and completely, but showed no emotion when discussing his mother's crimes or their impact on his life. Court observers noted that Linda Richardson showed more emotion during her son's testimony than Timothy did, suggesting that she was finally beginning to understand the full consequences of her actions. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Linda Richardson was sentenced to 4 years in state prison, ordered to pay full restitution of $63,000 plus interest, and prohibited from working in any educational setting for the remainder of her life. The judge specifically noted the psychological harm caused to Timothy as an aggravating factor that justified the maximum sentence under state guidelines. But the criminal conviction was only the beginning of the consequences that would flow from Linda's crimes. The Richardson family filed a civil lawsuit against the school district, alleging that inadequate financial oversight had enabled Linda's theft and that school administrators had failed to protect Timothy from emotional abuse that occurred on school property. The lawsuit sought damages for Timothy's psychological treatment, the family's legal expenses, and the long-term impact on his educational and social development. The civil case revealed additional disturbing facts about the school district's financial management. Auditors discovered that Linda Richardson's theft had been possible because the district lacked basic oversight procedures that should have detected her crimes much earlier. Multiple employees had access to financial accounts without adequate supervision. Fundraising money was routinely held in personal accounts rather than official district accounts, and financial reporting requirements were so loosely enforced that Linda had been able to submit obviously fraudulent documentation without triggering any review processes. The school district ultimately agreed to a settlement of $240,000, paid primarily by their insurance carrier. More importantly, they implemented comprehensive financial reforms that included mandatory dual authorization for all transactions, monthly audits of fundraising accounts, and training programs designed to help school employees recognize and report potential financial crimes. These reforms became a model for other districts across Pennsylvania and eventually influenced state legislation governing school financial management. Timothy's recovery proved to be a longer and more complex process than anyone had anticipated. The psychological trauma of his mother's betrayal and public humiliation required intensive therapy that continued for more than 2 years. He struggled with trust issues that affected his relationships with teachers, family members, and peers. Academic performance declined significantly as he dealt with anxiety and depression that made concentration difficult. The family eventually decided to relocate to another state where Timothy could attend school, without the constant reminder of his mother's crimes and his own role in exposing them. Robert Richardson faced his own challenges as he attempted to rebuild his relationship with Timothy, while processing his own feelings of betrayal and failure. Family therapy sessions revealed the extent to which Linda's manipulation had affected every aspect of their household dynamics. Robert discovered that many conversations and family decisions over the past 2 years had been influenced by Linda's criminal activities in ways he had never suspected. The process of rebuilding trust and establishing new family routines required professional guidance and significant time. The case also had broader implications for how schools handle suspected child abuse and neglect. Timothy's obvious distress during and after the classroom incident should have triggered mandatory reporting procedures that might have led to earlier discovery of the underlying problems. But school personnel failed to recognize the signs of emotional abuse or to understand the connection between Timothy's behavioral changes and potential family dysfunction. New training programs were developed to help teachers and administrators identify children who might be suffering from abuse related to parental criminal activity. Today, 3 years after Linda Richardson's conviction, the impact of her crimes continues to ripple through multiple communities and institutions. Timothy Richardson, now 11 years old, has made significant progress in his recovery, but still receives counseling to address trust issues and anxiety related to his traumatic experiences. His family has established a new life in Colorado, where Robert found employment with a construction company, and Timothy attends a school where his background is unknown to staff and students. The Richardson case became a catalyst for legislative changes that extended far beyond Pennsylvania's borders. The Timothy Richardson Protection Act was passed by the Pennsylvania legislature in 2023, establishing mandatory financial oversight procedures for all public schools and requiring specific training for educators to recognize signs of child abuse related to parental criminal activity. Similar legislation has been introduced in 12 other states, and federal lawmakers have discussed incorporating these protections into national education policy. Educational professionals across the country now study the Richardson case as an example of how financial crimes in schools can create secondary victims among the children of perpetrators. Professional development programs include scenarios based on Timothy's experience, teaching educators to recognize when a child's behavioral changes might indicate serious family dysfunction. The goal is to provide intervention and support before children suffer the kind of psychological damage that Timothy experienced. Linda Richardson was released from prison in August 2024 after serving 2.5 years of her 4-year sentence. She now works in a retail position and has had no contact with Timothy or Robert since her arrest. Court-ordered restitution payments will continue for the next 15 years, and she remains prohibited from working in any educational setting. Attempts by her attorney to arrange supervised visits with Timothy were rejected by family court after psychological evaluations indicated that contact with his mother would be detrimental to his continued recovery. The financial reforms implemented by the Riverside School District have prevented 2 additional cases of employee theft that likely would have gone undetected under the old system. Other districts that adopted similar oversight procedures have reported discovering and stopping financial crimes that had been ongoing for years. The total amount of theft prevented by these reforms is estimated to exceed $2 million across Pennsylvania alone. Perhaps most importantly, the Richardson case has changed how child protection agencies approach cases involving parental financial crimes. Social workers now receive specific training to recognize signs that children may be suffering emotional abuse related to their parents' criminal activities. New protocols ensure that children in these situations receive appropriate psychological support and that their testimony is handled with sensitivity to their unique position as both witnesses and victims. Timothy Richardson's story serves as a powerful reminder that criminal behavior rarely affects only the direct perpetrators. Children who witness parental crimes often become unwilling accomplices who must choose between loyalty to their families and adherence to moral principles they don't fully understand. When parents then punish children for possessing inconvenient knowledge, the psychological damage can be devastating and long-lasting. The courage that Timothy showed in telling the truth about his mother's activities, despite her attempts to undermine his credibility, ultimately protected countless other children from similar victimization. His willingness to testify honestly about painful family experiences contributed to legal and policy changes that will benefit vulnerable children for generations to come. While the personal cost of his honesty was enormous, Timothy Richardson's story demonstrates that even children can be powerful agents of justice when adults fail to protect them. This case reminds us that the people we trust most can sometimes pose the greatest danger to those who depend on them. It challenges us to look beyond surface appearances and to take seriously the concerns of children who may be witnessing criminal behavior in their own homes. Most importantly, it shows us that protecting children from abuse requires vigilance not just from parents and teachers, but from entire communities committed to ensuring that no child suffers alone with secrets too dangerous to keep. So what does this story really tell us? That sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people we trust the most. That love, when twisted by fear and desperation, can become a weapon, and that justice, even when served, may arrive too late to undo the damage. Would you have spotted the red flags? Would you have believed a quiet boy with a story too painful to tell? Maybe the real lesson here isn't just about what happened in one classroom, but about how many Timothys the world overlooks every day. If you loved and connected with this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us for more powerful stories just like this one.